We've now come to the penultimate session of the day, and one I'm particularly looking forward to. And I'd like to introduce our two extraordinary speakers. First of all, we have Sonia Livingston. She's professor in the Department of Media and Communications at the London School of Economics and Political Science. She has published 20 books on media audiences, children and young people's risks and opportunities, media literacy and rights in the digital environment. Her new book, which I am going to hold up right now, her new book, co-authored with Alicia Blum-Ross, is Parenting for a Digital Future: How Hopes and Fears About Technology Shape Children's Lives. And it's a terrific read. Also joining us is John Palfrey, president of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. John is a well-respected educator, author, legal scholar, and innovator with expertise in how new media is changing learning, education, and other institutions. Before MacArthur, he was the head of school at the Phillips Academy, one of the most prestigious and innovative and oldest secondary schools in America. He was also a professor at Harvard Law School and the executive director of the Berkman Center for the Internet and Society, also at Harvard. And John is the author of several books, including Born Digital, which he co-authored with Urs Gasser. And in 2008, he chaired the Internet Safety Technical Task Force. And he is the co-author, once again, with Urs Gasser, of another new book just released called The Connected Parent, an expert guide to parenting in a digital world. And hopefully we can bring them both up now through the magic of technology. And there you are. Welcome both, John and Sonia. How are you?
Very good. Thank you, Stephen. Yes.
Welcome, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have the both of you here, and to round up this extraordinary day. So let's start. Sonia, let's start with you. And by the way, thank you. I know it's much later for you in London than it is for us here. So appreciate you staying with us. Tell us a little bit about the genesis of your book. Where did it start from? Why did you write it now? And oh, was it written before, during, or after the pandemic?
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, it was, I'll start with the second question. It was written before the pandemic, but actually we were still kind of doing the very final edits and proofs as the pandemic began. And so we just kind of worked in a tiny, weeny bit into the book itself. But why did I write it? I mean, as you know, I've been working, doing research on children's experience of the internet for many, many years, and thinking about parents as a kind of route to understanding their children. But I think, like many people in this field, I wasn't really seeing parents quite so much as people in themselves. And so part of the motivation of the book was really to kind of understand the parent experience and parents as people in the round. I know that in a way it's kind of obvious, but when you listen in policy discussions, people don't always listen to parents, consult parents, see them as people. And when they do, there is often a kind of a deficit account, a kind of a sense that parents are problematic or wrong or absent. So it was an effort to really kind of bring parents into the picture in the round and get their perspective.
I love that phrase, parents as people in the round. I'll borrow that if you don't mind. Now, we had Alicia Blum-Ross with us earlier today on an earlier panel. You and she talked about 3 genres of digital parenting. Can you tell us roughly what these are, and why did you fall into these 3 buckets?
I would say that when we began interviewing parents, and basically the heart of the book is interviews and kind of observations with about 70 parents who we got to know, some of them really well. And there was a moment in the research when we just thought, everyone is so different. Families are all so different. We just can't generalize. And in a way, the diversity among families seemed really, really important to recognize. But then we thought, okay, of course, there are some patterns, some ways that we can kind of see that parents are engaged in a similar task, but taking different tacks. And so the three genres we came up with were genres of practice, not, if you like, kind of categories of parent, though of course people vary. So I think we might begin with those who resist, and some parents, or most parents, some of the time, kind of resist the digital world and feel it's going too fast and too far and is kind of beyond their control. And this especially came out because we invited parents to look back at their own childhood and kind of then look at their children's childhood. And the comparison really brought out the kind of the sense that they were losing control. And I think, you know, interestingly, we found quite a number of parents who were really embracing technology, or again, many parents who embraced in some ways for some of the time. And the embracing seemed to us something that isn't very much recognized, the idea that parents might themselves be digital natives, that they might themselves be geeks. We interviewed some blogging parents and parents who kind of, you know, had a lot of digital knowledge and loved technology. And we felt their voices weren't quite heard. And then our third genre, which all parents do at some point more or less, was balancing. And about balancing, I would say, I don't know who listening to this call does yoga, but if I asked everyone listening now to try and stand on one leg, we would all realize balancing is incredibly hard. It's not just find a balance and then you live with it and you know where you are. It's a constant effort and a constant adjustment. And that kind of sense of constant effort and adjustment is something that we saw most parents doing more or less, but kind of around their particular kind of point of balance. And that would vary depending on all the circumstances that we tried to explore in the research.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, well, we'll explore some of those in a moment. John, same existential questions for you. Why this book? Why now? Before, during, or after the pandemic?
Stephen, thank you. And what a great conference you've been putting on as always. And Sonia, what fun to be with you. Early on in Sonia's book, she notes that the research was funded at least in part by the MacArthur Foundation, and we couldn't be prouder of the work that you and your colleagues have done on the underlying research over many years, and then the outcome of the book is just brilliant. So thank you, and it was a lot of fun to read your book just as ours was coming out as well. Stephen, the timing was actually very similar. So Sonia and Alicia beat us to it by a couple months, but we did have the opportunity to make some edits around the COVID situation before the book went to bed. We didn't actually do all that much, just as Sonia said. We hope our book, The Connected Parent, will be an evergreen book in the sense of not frozen in the COVID moment. On the other hand, I do think that there are many things we're learning, certainly about screen time as an example, which that debate I think has sort of been thrown out the window by the COVID moment, at least for those of us households who have kids who are learning from home and so forth. So there was an opportunity to do a little bit of rethinking and rewriting, but the bulk of the work and the bulk of the research certainly predates it. I'd say very specifically the why on The Connected Parent is back when you and I were working on the Internet Safety Technical Task Force, and when the Born Digital book came out in 2008 or so, we were asked many, many times by parents to say, okay, that's great about the research, it's wonderful, you're academics, what should we do about it, right? We were asked by the Attorneys General, we were asked by the Congress what we should do about internet safety. Likewise, when I would present about the book, and certainly as a head of school, I get asked for advice. This book is an advice book, which we didn't do before on purpose, but we basically said, we are gonna read everything by Sonia Livingstone, everything by Stephen Balkam, and all the great scholars and activists and advocates that we admire, and we're going to put that into a framework that's easy for parents to read and understand. And that's really what The Connected Parent is. It is not a supremely academic book, but hopefully it's grounded in really sound research that academics have done over a long period of time.
Well, yeah, the styles of the book are quite different and actually very complementary in that regard. So I would urge everyone listening in to get both of them. John, talk about this link between what you called the connected parent and connected learning. What do you mean by that?
Thank you for raising that. So when Sonia was working on her original research, it was a part of MacArthur's commitment to exploring this idea of connected learning. And it's very much a learner-centric approach to understanding the digital age and realizing that learning takes place both in formal structures like schools, but very much so outside. The kind of geeks that Sonia was referring to, who are parents and kids, often are doing learning in those interstitial moments, in places they might be riding a bus from one place to another, or they might be camped out in a library, or they might be in an after-school program. So much learning happens outside the formal settings of our educational system, and that's a good thing in our view. There's a lot of opportunity for kids to be interest-driven in their learning and to pursue passions of various sorts along the way, and to have the kinds of agency that your youth panel talked about earlier in the day. All those things are what we mean when we talk about connected learning. But we also know that these opportunities are not evenly distributed, that there are extremely divisive and bad patterns that have developed around equity or inequity in our society, and that many of the people who are able to pursue the best forms of connected learning are the most elite and best supported kids in some ways, and particularly along lines of race and socioeconomic status in the United States. I believe so in the UK, although Sonia should speak to that. Certainly we've seen data outside the US that shows that too. So being aware of those divides that I think come out of the connected learning research too. And that bridges over to a connected parenting paradigm, and that's the argument we make in our book.
Great, great. So I'd like you both to address the issue of screen time. I mean, at last year's FOSI conference, screen time was kind of front and center. It was the thing that everyone was wringing their hands about, and our children's brains were turning into mush and so on. And then March came along and utterly upended the notion of it. Where do you guys land on this, particularly after the work you've just done with all of these parents? Sonia, why don't you start?
Happy to. Yeah, I think one of the astonishing moments of the pandemic is the way in which society has so profoundly relied on digital connectivity for almost everything we try to do. And that has set a lot of people thinking about questions of the importance of connectivity, the irrelevance of measuring screen time rather than the quality and the nature of engagement with particular kinds of content. And also, as John just said, the really pressing issues of inequality in terms of access, not only to the internet, to devices, to quiet places to use those devices in, and to the kind of literacy and skills that allows you to kind of get the most out of the devices. So I think, the pandemic has made it evident that time is not the issue. But I would add two reasons from the research we did that also made me want to throw out screen time. And one was the way in which it has become a kind of a rod for parents' back, a problem in itself and a source of conflict within the family that almost kind of distracting parents from questions about what the children are engaging with, or what you might hope the children are engaging with, or doing something else. That very question of checking the time, of using the apps to kind of measure the time, of worrying about the time has become a problem. And often we saw parents themselves kind of stressing about it between themselves. So it became a real source of domestic conflict. But at the same time, as John says, our book is not advising parents directly. It is trying to kind of stand back a bit and say, why did screen time become such an issue? And the argument we make there is, in a way, it became an issue because of its very simplicity, because it seems to offer control and like a solution to what is in fact an incredibly demanding and challenging array of both technological changes and also societal changes. And sometimes we saw in the families ways in which families were grappling with all kinds of issues which have deep and complex causes, but they kind of fixated on the technology or saw the technology as the kind of the thing in front of them that perhaps they could control this. You know, poverty was difficult to control, family breakdown difficult to control, the challenges of migration and leaving family behind, you know, lots and lots of really kind of profound struggles, but somehow people felt the technology is the thing they could control and they could measure the time. Actually, they couldn't measure the time. That became the problem, but they felt it offered that promise of controllability, even though, you know, it didn't solve all those other challenges they were facing.
Thank you. John?
I would ditto what Sonia said. And Stephen, if you were looking for a lot of disagreement in this panel of two, you're not going to get it certainly on screen time. And of course, we've relied in so many ways on Sonia's research over so long. But the amplification I would do would be to bring in the comments from Nicole Turner-Lee in the previous panel, in which she was highlighting the huge differences in broadband access. And I can just say, sitting in Chicago, where the MacArthur Foundation is located and where I now live, we knew that 1 in 5 students in the spring were not able to access school, period. Once the Chicago public schools were shut down, we see that happening again. Chicago public schools will not be in session in person until at least the middle of January at this point. So if you have only 80% and you know, with 20% not able to access at all their learning, that is a huge cost to society. Set aside for a moment the inequities, which we know where that falls. And I think that is a much better and more important frame than the screen time frame that I think we had before. And you know, I think that the quality over quantity approach is absolutely the right one to bring to bear as parents. Is there such a thing as too much screen time? Of course there is. There's too much everything. There's too much eating ice cream. There's too much, you know, wasting time of all sorts, but really to focus on measuring every last minute of your kids' time is not a great idea. The approach we took in our book, though, was to look at every age of child and to note that the American Academy of Pediatrics, for instance, you know, argues in their revised and much better, I think, guidelines recently that, you know, kids from 0 to 2, there's no real reason for them to have screen time. We say in an era of COVID, it's a great idea to have a little screen time to connect to your grandparents or whoever it is that, you know, you are not present in your life, even at those early ages. But you know, that there's no other reason for a very small child to have screen time early. But you know, as kids get older, there's really very few ways in which controls of that sort make a lot of sense.
All right. Okay. And I will disagree with you, John. There is never too much ice cream. Just want to put that out.
That's great.
Sonia, let's shift gears a little bit. You devote an entire chapter to geeks and geeky culture. Why did you do that? And what can you draw from that culture to help what I described, I guess, as ordinary parents and families?
Well, I'll blame John and the MacArthur Foundation in a way, because it was the Connected Learning Research Network, which was brilliantly led by Mimi Ito, who kind of first got me thinking about geeks and the idea that, as John just said, what are geeks are people who kind of spontaneously choose to learn about something because they want to know. You know, it's kind of the opposite of the government mandated, you must learn digital literacy or you must learn coding because it's good for you and it'll stand you good. You know, these are the people who choose to learn, who are excited about learning and who find ways of learning and understanding outside formal situations, but they kind of find their way. And we became very intrigued that this thought of in terms of both the parents, especially, but also the kids, these kind of counter the sense that you sometimes hear from well-meaning advisors of families, which is to say, we experts, we know everything, but you parents and kids, you're there to learn from us because you don't know anything yet. And we wanted to say, no, sometimes the kids know an awful lot and sometimes the parents know a lot. And it's, you know, so we need to have different conversations with parents and with kids. And then having said, you know, we will seek out some of these parents who are really geeky or have the geeky kids. Then we became intrigued by what goes on in the family. You know, so we had one family where I remember where both the mother and the son were really into coding and gaming and kind of geeking out together. And what did we learn from them? We learned something about a different pattern of family harmony, if you like, a way of learning together. The Cooney Centre calls this joint media engagement, but this is like joint media engagement in spades. You know, this is like really, there are families who love that kind of mutual, shared, respectful learning, and we could see it as a way of negotiating a style of family life, as well as learning something about technology. I think we also, I mean, of course, we learned, you know, inequality runs right through this whole day, and we've heard a lot about it, but there's no question that the more geeky families that we researched tended to be the more privileged ones. And it takes a measure of privilege to have access to the after school clubs, to the youth clubs, to the kind of tech that people kind of could kit out their homes with the time and kind of knowledge to engage in it. So it was a relatively privileged way of engaging with the digital world, but it also demonstrated to me the power of what families can learn and want to learn if they are given some of the resources and some of the time, and just the kind of encouragement, the kind of belief in themselves. And that, because another theme of the book, sorry, I'll hand to John, but another theme of the book is how often schools or society more generally didn't have that faith in parents. And yet, you know, with the opportunity, we saw that they could learn many things and guide their kids very ably.
Okay. I'm going to ask you both a question that both Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey were asked in yesterday's congressional hearings. And that is there something called internet addiction? John, why don't you start? Where do you fall? Where do you and Urs fall on the A word?
Well, you know, neither Urs nor I have the academic background to say for sure that it is not our training. But where we come down in the book is that internet addiction itself is probably not the right way to frame it. That we do foresee that some students have a disorder in this way, and I certainly observed that with a small percentage of the students I got to know very well as a high school principal over a number of years. You know, I'm not totally convinced that the definition of an addiction is met by what we observed among young kids. And really where we go on the topic in our book is to say it is a manifestation sometimes, very extensive media usage that is well above the norm of lots of other underlying concerns, whether that is the anxiety, the depression, the stress, the suicidality, other things that we know are on the rise among kids. I'm not saying at all, I'm very purposely not saying there's a causal relationship because the data don't show that necessarily. But we do know that sometimes it is a manifestation of some of those other things. And for parents, the advice really is you have to get at those underlying concerns. And sometimes that does mean having to limit the use of the technology as part of broader therapies. But again, we're not psychiatrists or psychologists, and so we are really sort of embracing what other experts have found.
So I would completely agree with that. I think that is what John has just articulated. I see as the kind of emerging consensus across experts, and there's been lots of kind of you know, high-level efforts to review the whole literature and for key organisations to kind of come out with a view. And what I see them saying, and I guess I am a psychologist, though not a clinical psychologist, is that the clinicians are saying that perhaps somewhere maybe between 1% and 3% of young people are really struggling with a problem that they can't address, and that is really very difficult for them to kind of manage their daily lives in relation to their time spent with technology. But as John said, you know, there are deeper causes. The tech doesn't cause the addiction, though, of course, it is designed to have addictive qualities. So it doesn't help either. And for those who are vulnerable or can be drawn in, the technology can indeed prove problematic. But I think what really bothers, there are two things that really bother me about the addiction discourse, apart from the kind of misuse of science in some ways. And one is that in the last few years, when I interview kids, I hear them describe themselves as addicted, not just as a joke, but as a sort of a self-blame and a sense that they are taking on the kind of negative discourse about them from society. And I find that very depressing. And the other is the parents who haven't got another way of understanding their children when their child does use technology for a long time. So, I mean, if I can just give one example of a single mum that we interviewed whose son gamed and produced kind of gaming, created things, but also play games for, I don't know, well over 4 hours a day, but, sometimes well into the night, it could be hours. And his mother was dreadfully worried about him because of the addiction discourse. But when we talked to him, clearly he was a geek, clearly he loved the games, clearly he was, hoping for that career which may or may not materialize, but he did also do sports, he did also eat well, he was also a kind of courteous, helpful boy around the home, he did maintain his friendships, he slept. So I don't know how he found time in the day to do everything. He was a bit of a magic kid, but that's why I think in most cases, we can say, if your child's sleeping, learning, got their friends, doing their homework, friendly around the house, the number of hours is not the point.
Okay. We're quickly running out of time. I want to make sure to squeeze in a couple more. I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at our report that we came out with this morning. I was curious to know any reactions, and given that we have some of the major tech platforms here with us today, what thoughts do you have about what the tech industry could do to better help the different genres of parents in their busy lives? John?
Stephen, thank you, and congratulations on this important research. And I do think that you've opened a new frontier in thinking differently, I think, about the way in which controls, when they are ones that kids have more of a agency in designing and using and putting to work in ways that work for them, can be an important part of the ecosystem. And I think that's a very, very important finding, and I think does flip on its head some of the concerns that those of us who are in this field have had about some of the parental controls that have been kind of designed in other ways and can often undermine trust. So I really think that's a wonderful point. I have for a long time, and with you, Stephen, been calling on tech companies to do more and to take more seriously their obligations. Certainly we see in the Section 230 debates and in many other policy circumstances the notion that companies can and should use their extraordinary power more for good. And we can, there's not enough time really to go into the specifics, but I think that is a super important part of the story. And I think we also see when companies do not do that there will be a techlash. There has been a techlash, and there's good reason for it in many cases. So I think that your report is one of several indicators of directions that companies can take that are both responsible, that protect kids, and that in fact are going to work, unlike some of the previous controls that frankly don't.
Great. Sonia?
Right, I agree. I think it was incredibly unfortunate in a way that we kind of set off in this long digital journey that we've been on, with the idea that somehow the parents and the children were against each other, and that the parents had to control or spy on or snoop on what it was their kids were doing, and that broke down trust within the family, as well as causing all kinds of difficulties in relation to digital platforms and activities. And the result was, in a way, that children have, we then kind of celebrated some of the kids' workarounds and ways of evasion, but this was not a collaborative way forward. So I absolutely agree. Anything that promotes children's agency and kind of wise decision making, and parents' sense that they can kind of tailor that digital world a bit more to their values and what they know about their child, because they usually know their child best, is vital. That's not to say I don't think that, there can be a lot more. And it's been very striking to me that the theme, I heard the theme of today, and I've been kind of listening to quite a lot on and off, a very strong theme emerging about privacy to you. And that sense that, and privacy not between parent and child, but in terms of companies, processes of data collection, and the kind of the behind the scenes digital ecosystem. And I think there too, and some of the families we interviewed in Parenting for Digital Future were very quickly dystopian, very quick to kind of move from a sense that, oh yes, there are some controls I have, some things I can do, but actually the game is lost. They take everything. I don't really have kind of more control than kind of on the surface. And I think that, so I think the problem of trust is actually still really huge. And until the question of privacy and data collection is addressed in a way that is fairer to parents and to children, including especially the parents and children, the children who are young and the parents who don't have the capacity to, you know, figure it all out. You know, until we kind of take that further step, I still think there will be something of a, there's a problem.
Sonia, I would say, oh, sorry, Stephen.
Go ahead, John. No, go ahead.
I was going to say on Sonia's behalf, as a European, or quasi-European anyway, depending how you define the boundaries of Europe, I've been interested
I'm a European.
Didn't want to presume on your behalf, but a little bit more shouting out that the European approach to at least a sensible, understandable view on privacy is something we might consider in the United States rather than this astonishing patchwork that we have. But that's been an interesting thing to hear poking through the comments today, Stephen.
Indeed. Well, thank you both for bringing Brexit in at the very last minute. We managed to get through the entire day without talking about that. No, I just want to thank you both. I could talk to you all day around these issues. I so admire the work that you guys have done, and particularly these two books that have just emerged at exactly the right time. So thank you, thank you. We'll be in touch, and please stay on. We have a networking event that's going to happen right after this. Sonia Livingston, John Palfrey, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen.
Okay, so this brings us to the very last session of the day, a chance for us to engage with each other via the networking feature, again on the left-hand side, to last chance to visit the exhibitors in the expo area, and if you feel like it, to connect with each other on a one-to-one basis. Please fill out those survey forms that we sent out just a few moments ago via email. And as a reminder, the videos from today's conference will be posted on our YouTube channel in the coming days. So I want to finish with a few final words. I began the day by saying we need to learn the hard lessons of this extraordinary time to create greater interdependence on each other. I suggested that we not be overwhelmed, but through all that we have seen and heard today, let's find a way to quickly recover and renew our faith in each other, our children, and our communities. Monica Lewinsky's very compelling story was a good example of exactly that. Let's learn to build resilience in ourselves and the social fabric that holds us together. Or as Tessie Ojo said earlier today, you can't build resilience through avoidance. So let's get engaged with our kids and with their online lives. And as Nicole Turner-Lee said in her memorable phrase, let's leave no child left offline. That's a challenge to all of us to ensure connectivity for all families. And let's show by example how to model this recovery for our kids to follow. And if we're not capable of that, then let's step aside and take our cues from the young social activists that we've had here today and the many others online as they fight for what's right and humane and sustainable in this world. Here at FOSI, we will continue the work of building a culture of responsibility online, where governments, industry, law enforcement, parents, teachers, and the kids themselves have different but overlapping areas of responsibility to make the online world safer, more civil, and compassionate. Please join me in thanking our very generous sponsors who, through their financial support, gave us the opportunity to host this gathering today. To our wonderful speakers, panelists, and moderators who shed some much light on the wide range of issues that we are facing. And to our exhibitors for illustrating and discussing with us the products and services they have created to be part of the solution. A thanks to all the folks at the Hop-In platform and our video production company, CVW, for all their technical and logistical wizardry and support. And of course, to the ever amazing FOSI staff team who turned on a dime back in the spring to not only work from home, but to convert a large physical conference into a virtual one without skipping a beat. So my deep gratitude goes out to Emma Morris, Emily Mulder, Andrew Zach, Jonathan Bridgman, and Aaron McCowie, and of course, our wonderful events consultant, Stephanie Condello. And lastly, my thanks to all of you for the tireless work that you do, whether in a government agency, a tech company, or an NGO. Whether you're an educator, a researcher, a student activist, or a hard-working parent, thank you for all that you do to be resilient and to model resiliency, and for making the online world safer for kids and their families. And last but not least, to quote from the Foo Fighters, "It's times like these you learn to live again. It's times like these you give and give again. It's times like these you learn to love again. It's times like these, time and time again." Be well, stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you in person next year. Goodbye.